Nobody that you know could afford to buy a house outright, almost anywhere in the country. So in order to buy a house, you have to borrow the money from a bank, which buys the house for you and owns it until you pay them back with interest. But if no one you know can afford to buy a house outright, who is the bank getting all of that money from? Banks in the UK are licensed to create loans out of thin air, essentially. They do not need to have corresponding deposits in order to make a given loan. But banks do need deposits to pay other banks. In order for you to pay for your Jane Remover merch, your bank has to transfer that £40 to the bank used by her record label. And in the case of mortgages, banks have to pay the person that you're buying your house off of, i.e. transfer to the bank that they use. So, whilst there is no necessary requirement for banks to have the deposits prior to lending, if you're lending money to someone, they're going to want to spend it. And so the banks must ensure that they have enough deposits of one kind or another to enable this spending. Technically, deposits are a liability for a bank, since they pay depositors some form of interest. Banks make a profit on the difference between the interest they receive from their borrowers and the interest they owe to their depositors. Some deposits pay no interest, like current account balances. But savings accounts, ISAs, or bonds issued by banks are the types of deposits that people with money to invest want. These deposits give the bank relatively stable reserves that they can use to make payments. And the loans, including mortgages, that these deposits facilitate yield a return that the bank uses to pay off its depositors when the time comes. Whilst modern banks have a variety of complicated sounding mechanisms that they can use to lend a little bit more than they actually have, the situation is really the same as it's always been. Banks are middlemen between savers and borrowers who skim off a profit for facilitating this transaction. So clearly, house prices in the UK are not a result of the average British person having more money, because no one is buying a house outright. Similarly, house building has been slowed significantly over the last few decades, and this tightening of supply must have had an effect on prices. But if it was only this, prices would still be related to average wages. If average house prices are now 7, 8, 9 times the average yearly wage, this is a total decoupling of wages and house prices. If demand is no longer coming from wage earners, some other group of people must have gotten massively richer over the last few decades and are interested in buying houses. But this group is not, at the moment, directly purchasing housing. It is depositing money with banks, and those banks are using these deposits to generate a return for themselves and these rich depositors by lending out increasingly large mortgages. Essentially, it's turning buying a house into a form of renting. It's far more hassle to be a landlord, responsible for replacing boilers and repairing damage, even if some landlords aren't great at doing that. It's far easier to simply lend the money out, shifting all of the responsibility for repairs and maintenance onto the owner, in inverted commas. The rich still get a very significant income. In fact, although mortgage payments are consistently lower than rents, the landlord has costs. The lender, for the most part, has none. So who comes out of it better off? Well, if you consider that most landlords are tiny scale, owning 1 or 2 properties, and in almost every case have mortgages on their buy-to-lets, we begin to see that in most cases, whether it's a landlord or an owner-occupier, the real owners and the real beneficiaries are the bank and its richest depositors. So if this is the state of play, and much of the public wants to see house prices fall, it begins to be clear what needs to be done. We need to find a way to reduce how much money is being lent out by massively regulating the size and duration of mortgages, regulating house prices, or taxing away all of this excess spending power that the rich are using to massively inflate house prices. In fact, it begins to be clear that our house prices are yet another consequence of allowing assets and the streams of passive income that they generate to become hyper-concentrated. If you have a tiny group of people who receive all of the passive income in a given society, they won't be able to consume a significant percentage of that income, even if they live like royalty. As a result, your economy is saddled with a group of people who are absolutely desperate to buy more assets all the time, to reinvest these massive flows of income that they can't consume. As the US is proving at the moment, even significant economic growth will not be enough to absorb all of this reinvestment. And so, the rich will end up trying to buy existing assets, like housing. There are many other problems that can be traced back to this central problem, including unemployment, low wages, and constrained government spending. But I'll bet that house prices are one of, if not the most pressing concerns in your life. There are many ways to address this issue, and surely an increase in supply is part of it. But unless we understand the root of the problem, we can't design competent strategies to fix it. Thanks for waiting to the end of the video. Just like that Ed Sheeran album where he sings that like Irish folk song. Come pill to me, the parting glass. At the end, bonus track, special gift, treasure. This is your special treasure, your gift, bonus track. And it's a special surprise. Guess what the surprise is? Oh my God, what's it going to be? Guess what? Surprise, I have a podcast. Can you believe that? Isn't that insane? I actually have a podcast as well. I don't just have a YouTube channel and a Substack at Friendly Society Substack. I also, can you believe it, have a podcast? So if you think that's a very novel thing for someone to have, and you'd love to hear just what goes on in my head, I'm just kidding. It's more of the same, but it's a free-flowing type thing. It's the same as this. I talk about serious things, okay? You're going to learn. Well, you're going to hear. You might not learn, but you will hear about things that are happening. The podcast is friendlypod on Spotify. That's the only place you can get it. Don't look anywhere else. Come filter me the parting glass. Thanks for that one, Ed.